Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for February 28th, 2025. I'm Benji Fisher, sharing my screen and moderating, and also present are Ralph Kohler, Simo Hell, and Thomas Howell. For the past several weeks, we've been working on this issue. It is 337-0326, Refine Field Descriptions. For the sake of the recording, I will walk you through it. Let me first share a link in the Zoom chat. Um, and I've made a break with my usual procedure, and I've applied the current merge request to this site already. So we'll see a few things there. But anyway, what are we discussing? If you go to Structure, Content Types, and then manage the fields for any content type and create a new field, you have a bunch of choices of mostly field groups. Some of them are groups with just one element, they're field types. And a little bit on this page, but mostly on the following pages, we've been discussing the interface text here. So some time ago, Ralph, did I read? I think when I started the meeting, I forgot to read off the names. Also here are Ralph Kohler, Simo Hell, and Thomas Howell. Thank you all for joining. And some months ago, Ralph put together this spreadsheet we've been working from where we have, I think I want the second tab mostly, the current interface text in column A, and we have the draft we're recommending in column C, and a few other proposals in the other columns. And over the course of the last several meetings, we've made a lot of progress here. We've filled in a lot of these. I think mostly what we have to work on is the date and time. So I guess going back to this page.
The float is still missing.
That's true. And that is because a recent commit to Drupal core removed it from the UI.
Oh, it's gone?
If you have a list of float field, we talked about this a little bit last week. If you have a list of float field, you can continue to edit it. If you want to create a new one, you can do it programmatically, but you can no longer do it through the UI.
Oh.
And that's why we didn't bother to put in anything.
Okay. That I haven't noticed yet.
Um, right, I meant to say, does anyone have any suggestions for the text right here, date and time?
Well, I'm not a fan of date and or time without like some sort of divider between them. It just looks like someone couldn't decide what word to use. So, um,
So let's see. I guess that would be on the first tab.
Yep.
Um, Date and time, current draft. So I guess some time ago we recommended a date and or time value, and you'd like to, I guess the usual thing is and/or.
yeah,
Any objections?
No.
Okay. And if we can get through this page, I think we'll be mostly done with these discussions. And this has always been a rather technical distinction. I remember from when I first started using Drupal, as a new user, I wanted to say, just tell me which one to use. What's the default? Um, and I guess a timestamp is Unix timestamp, a number of seconds. Right, it says it here. Number of seconds since January 1st, 1970, that arbitrary date. Um, Here it's stored in the database as a readable string format. Um,
For timestamp, I would probably mention first that it's a common machine format. Um, so everything else, it like makes sense. Like the compact, like the third line sounds good to me. Compact and efficient for storage, sorting, calculations. And I would probably start with commonly used by computers and machines and programmers, something along those lines.
um, so would that commonly used line be first, or would it come right after the description?
Rather after description.
If we're okay with 4 bullet points, sure.
And there's another one with timestamp. Timestamp doesn't have time zone, does it?
Right, it's just stored as an integer. So it specifies a time in UTC, and and time zones are time zones and daylight savings time, which is coming up soon, are what make all of this so difficult. So let's start with the easy stuff. So I think date and time, no one has objected to that. Oh, and date range. So we should probably work on this a little more, because we have not enabled every module in core. And there is at least this one field type. We've been mostly working with either the standard profile or the mommy profile. Um, and there are additional field types that we should probably consider. So Thomas, just to be a little bit difficult and funny, was saying that he was hoping to switch from date and time to time and date. Okay, so we have the 3 types: date, date range, and timestamp. Are those headers reasonable?
Yes. I mean, okay. So there's one challenge with calling line 28 just date. It seems like it therefore would never include time.
Uh-huh.
And so like I know that was one of the early thoughts I had. It's like, okay, so I have to use timestamp if I want to include time, was something that I took away years ago with Drupal 6 when I saw the word timestamp, and I did not know any of this stuff. So I do not know if I am the only person in history to have that thought. But calling everything date and time, but then not really featuring it was confusing to me.
Yeah, and let's go through the next step before We've made this mistake before with selection lists that we discuss the text without actually looking at how the fields work. So you have this option of date only or date and time. And those are the only options specific to this field type. So let's actually save that and go through and create a couple more. If you have a date range, let's just look briefly at that. Same two options. Oh, plus this additional all day option. Interesting that you don't have that for the date field. All the rest of these are standard things you'll see on any field. And if we choose timestamp,
Do you think day only under the first use case is the equivalent of all day?
I believe so.
It is.
Thanks. Okay, so now we've zipped through those possibilities. Yeah, so we should definitely say somewhere that this can be used to store date or date and time. And I kind of think that we should avoid changing the primary labels because that's out of scope for this issue. Date settings for basic page. Maybe it isn't. Sort of. Maybe we could. I guess do these options, date range, and timestamp, do they appear anywhere else in the user interface that we need to be consistent with?
Um, Maybe in views, but I'm not sure. But I no.
Yeah, I was going to say views.
Say structure views and add a view. Content sorted by newest first, create a page. That's fine. Save and edit. And if I add a field like the changed, oh, whoops, I didn't mean to add a filter. I meant to add a field. Um, and, well, actually, here I'll just be choosing how to format it, right? I don't see
Yeah.
dates anywhere. I guess, oh, well, what if I add one of the fields that I just added to the basic page content type?
I think change is actually a timestamp.
Say again?
Yeah, I was thinking that changed is a timestamp.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah, so at the point that I'm using views, the choice of the database format has already been made, and I think all I'm seeing here are the labels that I've given to things. I don't think I see anywhere the names of those fields. So maybe we are at liberty to change these. So for date, it does already say on the second line, date or date and time stored in a readable string format. So is that good enough, or does it need to be part of the label here, so that people don't think that they have to use one of the other options if they want to store times?
For me, I would probably break the second line. Oh, sorry, Ralph, go first.
No, go ahead. Finish first. No problem.
Um, uh, the second line for me would be broken into two parts. Um, Stored in a readable string format would correspond to the essentially machine readable, because that would compare and contrast that concept, like what is the difference in date versus date range or timestamp. Sorry. It throws me off because I read left to right, but I know in other UI or other, depending on screens, you may not read date and date range side by side. So comparing and contrasting date and timestamp are not necessarily easy. But the reason I would separate them is, for me, I would really emphasize like date or date and time, because that's the choice you're really making. Um, and I don't know that I like the ideal when it's at the top. That the line above it, like somewhere I'd want to see the very first thing, like that this does date or date and time, and maybe we could change date to all day or date and time. Oh, date with optional time, but it's defaults to date and time, and only date is the second option on the next page from what we saw. And I'm done.
Okay, and Ralph, go ahead.
And referring to the point Thomas made before about the difference between date and timestamp, I think it's a reasonable point, because usually it's always the case that the odds are there that people don't necessarily read the description and just skim the top labels, and therefore think that the first is about the date and the other is, the trigger term is time or timestamp, and therefore one is the first two are considered for dates, actual dates, and just the last is about time, and therefore it might be misleading potentially. And so maybe if we are changing the label as well, maybe make timestamp about the machine time in that Unix time format, and the other the date about the, how to call it, the human readable time format, and don't make it about date explicitly.
Right. Yeah, I think these are all good comments. I also want to point out, I look at the modules. The module name, even the label or the human readable name is date time and date time range. So maybe we should just call it date time and be consistent with the module name.
Sounds good.
And then, same thing here. Is that too technical? I kind of think it's not too technical, but maybe
I think
I'm just. Oh, go ahead.
no, you, Ralph.
I'm just checking currently on the date range. If you add a field like that, if you're able to add a time there as well, or if it's just the date. 1 second.
yeah, I'm pretty sure date ranges allow
Yeah, it's time as well. Yeah,
date and time.
yeah. Then date time range would be okay as well.
Could you go back to that again? I'm sorry.
So here are the settings for the date time range field.
And if you clicked on the date type, the choices. So what's the difference between date only and all day? Because this does differentiate between the two.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. No. I will look into that, but not during the meeting. I don't
It
know.
looks.
If one of you wants to open up the code and see what it does, feel free.
So for me, what I'm really seeing in all of these pages is that in the first line where we're trying to, like, I agree with you, people coming here, what would be most useful is telling them when they want to use this. And this is not the right phrasing, but my brain is telling me that when I look at timestamps when I want to reuse something within the ecosystem of Drupal, right? Something along those lines, because when it's human readable, it isn't reusable by code. You can't sort, there's all these things you can't do. So reuse is not the right term, but conceptually, I think that that first line, especially if we make, and I know it may be out of scope, the label change to date time, but if you make the date time change, I don't feel like we have to repeat ourselves inside and say date and time. Like every one of these handles variations of date and or like date only, date time only, time da 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 da.
Yeah, the timestamp doesn't give you those options, although when you go to, say, manage form display, test timestamp, I guess, oh, you also have no options here. So let's actually create a basic page and look at the widget for the test timestamp.
I thought there was some place where you could use things like the PHP formatting for time. I cannot remember where I saw that.
You can use that for default values. So I guess you need to enter a time. And that's sort of a significant user interface difference. You have to put in something for the time if you're using a timestamp. So in the other fields, the original text followed this pattern of ideal for such and such on the first line, and we've sort of rejected that. In other things, we've described what it is in the first bullet point, and typically in the last bullet point, we give an example. So I think we should follow that pattern here.
Used recommended for in the case of instead, in case of ideal. If you scroll up to the beginning, there we've used the recommended for pattern.
Right. But,
And that is more applicable in the ideal for case.
right, we certainly prefer recommended rather than ideal. Here we go. But we've also in many cases given examples. I guess you're right, Thomas, Ralph, that in this case examples are less interesting than when to use it. So I'm going to say that one of the things we should mention is that the time field is time is required. You cannot enter a timestamp without giving it a time.
That would be a good place for us to include a single example of a time. Like we could do 01 like right next to time is required. You could then show a date and time, because I think it's also surprising that it requires seconds as well. Like I had forgotten that it requires all fields to be filled.
So would you want to add something to this or make it a yet another bullet point?
I would make it time is required space um, parenthesis and then just an example of a date time.
So the way it's entered, where did I?
Oh, it isn't second, it's AM, PM.
Yeah, the way you enter it and the way you display it are a lot of things. I'm not sure which one I would want to use as an example.
Could we do the standard like the DD, like the MM/DD/YYY, like doing the, and then you like have the, yeah. Oh, there wasn't second, it was AM, PM, I thought. I made a mistake there. Or was it seconds when you entered it in?
Uh, so the AM comes last.
Oh yeah, it does have it. Yeah.
And again, it depends on the form widget. And you might have a form where you're required to use 24-hour time, and then there's no AM PM indicator. This one uses the AM PM indicator. So considering that these are going to be, we want the bullet points to be the differentiators. If we're going to say that the time is required for timestamp, should we say that time is optional for the others? And I think that
Yeah.
might be more effective than the phrase date with optional time. Just have a separate line. I'm getting a thumbs up from Ralph and from Thomas. So let's just say here time is optional.
But I think in timestamps, you should say that both time and date are required. Because so it's also so not so that you can enter only a time.
Okay.
I think there would be cases where somebody would want to just add times, like to use as modifiers or kind of a for whatever reason, like wanting to have this add this amount of time to this created date and then do something. So we don't have anything with only time.
Okay. That's a good point. Let me move this down a bit. So again, I think our usual pattern is to start with the description of what it is, which in the timestamp is that. And I think Ralph's already put in column B, that is the first thing to start with.
One thought.
Yeah.
With the second bullet point, time is optional, would it make, and the date time label, would it make sense to simply strike date or date and time and simply say stored in human readable string format?
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing. In fact, do we have to say stored in?
Stored, yeah.
It's just a human readable
Oh,
string
true.
format, right?
True, yeah.
Do we want to give an example in this line or somewhere else?
I'd follow the earlier patterns and have an example at the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what that pattern is, but let's just, for now, what is it? A T.
Yeah. So that
Um,
it's different from ISO standard, which is annoying.
so we can, after the meeting, look up what the actual format is. And example, let me just go over to a terminal window. You won't be able to see that, but how do I get the Unix time? Oh, I can do it in a browser. Unix timestamp. Sure. Here we go. So sometime after the meeting, I'll go in and figure out. I will use the same time. Have to decide what date and time to use. But I'll use the same time for these two examples. Date time range, of course, I'll have to add a second date and end date. So human readable string format, time is optional. Some of these things, like it's an advantage that it's easy to read and understand for humans. I think that is totally irrelevant because, it's stored in the database. It's not shown in the interface. Whichever of these that you're using when you edit a form, you're going to get a human readable form. Ralph, why don't you just enter that in the spreadsheet rather than the Zoom chat?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and Simo in the chat points out dates are saved in varchar 20 fields in the database. So exactly 20 characters. And I think the example he gives is similar to the one Ralph gave. The time zone is always UTC. And you cannot store a time zone offset. It's always stored in UTC. And Simo gives a link in the chat. Let me just, for the sake of the recording, briefly open that page, the date time overview page on Drupal.org. docs/8/core/modules/datetime/datetime dash overview. Okay, so we start off with a description of what it is. And those two I think are good. We give the differentiators, time is optional, time is required. Date is also required. Can you store a time-only thing in a date time field? I have my test date field. I guess you do have to have a date. You can't store just a time. And if I look at my page, if I try to say 17:00, if I try to do that, will it let me save? No. Well, that was the date range, of course. Let me. So the test date currently has date only. If I make it date and time and reload this page. And if I blank this out, right? So date is certainly required in all of these cases. So date is required. That is not a differentiator. It's true for all three of them. I'm sorry, Ralph, how long have you had your hand up?
No worries. Just one remark in regards of the recommended for section. I was searching alongside, I remember vaguely there was a discussion and an issue by Martin Monclou about performance implications, and that I guess it was daytime is slower compared to timestamp, if I
Okay,
remember correctly.
so that would be consistent with this existing text that it's efficient for storage, sorting, and calculations.
It has
But something to point out in that context, yeah.
It has less than 20 characters, and it's not even characters, it's a number, so for sure it's more efficient, and the calculations are a lot faster if you add or subtract from that number any number of seconds. So then if you just do the calculations at that level, then it's for sure faster.
And isn't datetime even a string field?
It's a varchar 20.
Is
So
varchar means varchar means characters and numbers and symbols. Okay. Oh. And one remark in regards of timestamp. Oh no, forget. Sorry, forget it.
So yeah, let's list that as one of the differentiators. Oops, went too far. So since the date is required for all of these, I don't want to list it in the bullet points. The bullet points are for differentiators. Time is optional, time is required with granularity of seconds. And I'd like to have a text area above the options for the things that are common. We've come across that in other field types as well. And there I'm suggesting that we start by saying that the date is required, since that's common to all three. Thomas?
So I think it's implied, and I do not know the answer specifically, but with timestamp, it says that stored in seconds since January 1st, 1970. I
Yes.
assume that means you couldn't do 1142 AD. Like you couldn't pick a date 200 years ago. So
Oh, it can be negative.
it
No,
can be negative. I
can
don't
it be? How does that work? I mean, certainly we use timestamps for things before 1970.
yeah, it's possible in some cases use negative timestamps, but I don't know if it's possible with Drupal.
All right, so I'm just putting a valid date here, so the form will submit, and I'm putting a date from 1900 in the timestamp field.
so there
So I can, it looks like it can be negative, but it can't be that negative because it's only 32 bits or whatever. Okay, that is an excellent point, an important restriction. Simo?
Yeah, I have about that. If we can use that common to all text there, because I'm wondering if datetime extras contributed module, if that adds options to this list, or if it's just widgets. Since I think datetime extra, excuse me, I think datetime extras has option to use time only. So it has a field for time only, and I expect it would add its field options to date and time. I think Smart Date does. So this will be used by also other other fields than the core fields. So I wonder if there is some way, like if we are creating some conflicts there.
That's a good point. So should we go back to saying date is required, even though it's true for all of these three, all of the core fields? And Ralph, do you want me to open this link?
Which
The
of
one
the
you
two?
just posted in chat?
I've posted two. One Stack Overflow, and the other is in the Datetime extras.
Okay, well, let's copy that, which comes from Stack Overflow. So that's an important restriction. And just for the sake of the recording, let's give a little credit to Stack Overflow for this. And I'm not going to try to read out that URL. And the other link you put in was an issue in the Datetime Extras module. So project datetime_extras issues 3064640. And that's an issue to provide different storage backends. So that's in a contrib module, not in Drupal core.
Yeah, but it refers to the storage patterns used in Drupal core as well. Therefore, I've mentioned.
So it has information about core.
Yeah.
Okay. And Simo also linked to the Datetime Extras module in the chat. And Thomas?
I was thinking that I'm going back on my earlier suggestion request about putting the like day or the minute, the hour, minute, seconds, because I think that line could generate the pattern we're looking for, which is date is required, time is optional. Time, like, so that would be the differentiator by having some of the lines having them so date time, it would say date is required, comma, time is optional, period, or maybe I guess no period, but and the same for and then for date time range and timestamp, it would say um, uh, date is required, time is required. Because date time used timestamp as well.
Okay, so you're suggesting a solution to the point that Simo raised, that I'm only thinking of core here and we should not be saying that, and you're suggesting combining date and time on one line.
Yeah.
So date is required, time is optional. So something like that.
Exactly that, yes.
And then should I just follow exactly the same format?
That's what I would do. If someone else doesn't like how that is, then I'm happy to hear alternatives.
Yeah, I think standalone, that's not the way I would phrase it, but in this context, I think consistency is valuable. Go ahead.
I think it's you can distinguish them being different if you would say both date and time are required. So then it would be the difference wouldn't be the last word. So if somebody is kind of not reading carefully, then somebody might just scan and see that, oh, these are the same. So it would be easier to distinguish if it would be both date and time are required. So it would be different structure, but then it would be clearly distinguishable, that it's something different.
So you prefer it that way?
Yeah, so then it's easy to see that it's not the same, for sure. Or maybe it is not easier because then the format is different. Sorry. But
Okay, you're getting a thumbs up from Thomas. Yeah, I think you've convinced me. Having the difference be the last word on the line is not the best way to draw attention to the difference. We have 5 minutes left. So I think, Ralph, I think you entered a real example here, so we can take out the word fix me, right?
Oh, yes.
And date time range, we should start off by saying what it is. So it's a start date time and an end date time, both of which are like the date time that we've already described. What's a nice way to say that? Go ahead, Thomas.
I thought date time used timestamp. Is it a human readable string or is it actually a timestamp?
Date time uses something like this.
Okay.
And date time range uses 2 date times, a start and an end. So I guess one thing I would like is a graceful description of date time range as start and end. And I'd also like to sort of scan this first column. Is there anything here that we haven't added that we would like to put in? I don't see anything in column A that I want to add back. Go ahead, Ralph.
Isn't basically date time range two date time values simply? A start date time and an end date time, and let's phrase it that way. That is,
Exactly. So what do you want me to say?
uh, or
I don't want to say start time and end time because it's a date time. I don't want to say start date and end date because it could have a time. So uh, I just called it start and end. Uh, is that good as is? Improvements? Something totally different?
Could it be like a range with a start and end?
I don't love that partially because, range is part of the description and we're just repeating that. I'd rather lead with start and end.
Okay.
how about simply stating two date time values, one start and one end, or one for start and one for end, or something like that?
Let me add another row here. Two date time values.
Yeah.
One for the start and one for the ends.
The second part is a bit lengthy.
Yeah.
Why not just say two date time values colon start and end?
Yeah.
Like so.
Yeah.
And you can delete my suggestion. That does not need to sit there.
Which one was that? Was this one?
Yeah, range with a start and end. You can delete that.
Okay. So certainly two date time values has the advantage of being briefer than what I started with. It is 10 o'clock. Shall we go with this one? Two date time values, start and end?
Can we talk about it a little next week? Because I was going to say your suggestion or your point about range then gets duplicated with both of these because they both have date time in them. So the concern about range being repeated, we're also repeating date time. And we don't have time now to talk about it.
Okay, so let's leave it as here, work in progress. And of course, we could also talk about it on Slack if we find time in the week for the next meeting. Thanks. We're getting very close here, and let's try to get this issue finished up.
Yay.
Yes,
Yay.
please.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks.
See y'all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.